Hello everyone, in today's video we're going to be taking a look at a blast from the past. This is the Beechcraft V33 Bonanza. This is one of those Microsoft kind of classic great planes, and it's taken me quite a while to finally get to this one, and I'm pretty excited to get to it because this is it's pretty cool. And if you just look at the font of my little 64 sitting on the tail, it's like, oh man, you know that this thing is vintage 1950s tech. Let's get started. So when you first climb in here, my brain immediately goes, what? When it sees all the wood trim interior. I mean, look at this like material and the little cup holder here. I mean, look at this, look at this, look at this. It's just, I don't know, you can tell I'm gushing a bit here. But the interesting thing here is when I actually stick my head out to the back, you'll see here that we have room for theoretically 6 passengers if you have a very, very thin child for the back seat here. As a matter of fact, for people who are sitting directly behind us, we don't have a lot of room here either. So, of course, the Beechcraft family started as the Debonair, basically in the mid-1950s. The early versions of the Beechcraft, of course, or Bonanza, I should say, Debonairs, were these lovely V-tail ones, which I'm sure everybody's heard as being one of the classic doctor-killing airplanes, because they said this was a terrible idea. Why would you combine those like that? And turns out aerodynamically, it's actually a little superior to a conventional tail. The rigging gets a little more complicated. One of the things, of course, when we think of the Bonanza land, is the early Bonanzas had this really, really awkward yoke. Now, for those of you who have not had the pleasure of sitting inside one of these in the real world, if you give this thing a tug, you'll go, what the heck? But I love the fact that the little pin here that you would drop to basically stop this from moving around is just goes right through there to keep everything steady. So your gust lock is integrated into the yoke panel. And one of the cool things is you could actually grab this thing and move it to the other side. That's a technical term, by the way. And I love the fact your aileron trim is right on here. Now, there's a lot of things that make this thing a 1950s machine here. First of all, you probably notice with the vernier style throttles on here. The other thing you probably observe is the fact that a lot of really important things are hidden behind the yoke. Makes them a little more difficult to steal. One thing they've done for us to make our lives a little bit simpler is they did go ahead and take a lot of modern instrumentation, such as a little GNS over here, pop that over to make our lives a little bit simpler. We also have a nice modern radio stack. This is not the kind of things. And again, that makes your life a little bit simpler. The Bonanzas, of course, when you first see one of these things, you have to realize that they're big planes. I know that I was just complaining a second ago with the fact that you couldn't possibly bend your knees hard enough to get in there. But these are much, much bigger planes than 172s. If I look underneath this thing here, you can just get an idea of the scale of how small my head is versus how big the rest of the plane is. If I was sitting here in a 152 or something, you would realize very, very quickly just the difference in scale that we're operating with. Now, having the pleasure of having ridden one of these, not a 33, of course, it was 36 later years, I can respect how much bigger this thing is. So this is really a step up of a plane. The other thing you want to know too is when I open up the weight and balance real quickly here, coming down here, you'll notice my max takeoff weight is 3,400 pounds. For those of you who are 182 fans, which is a pretty big upgrade for 172s, you will notice that we top off at 2,950 pounds. This is a significantly bigger and significantly heavier plane. However, look at how tiny the fuel tanks are. We only have 44 gallons max on this, whereas a fully loaded 172 or 182 will do about, I think, 79, 80 gallons. So we're a little limited on range on this. So enough chit chat. Let's actually get this thing started and have some fun today. So as far as startup goes, this is an old school engine. It's a pretty good size engine. Some of the later Bonanzas had really, really big engines. This earlier version's not quite up there as far as power goes, but it actually does work really, really well for us. We're looking, of course, at a Continental here. This is one of the big 6 cylinders. Typically, this particular version, I think it's either 280 or 300 horsepower. So let's get it going. So first things first, we want to make sure our fuel is turned on. So down here, we have our left tank, right tank. Current time in the morning is 9:12, so we're going to be working off the right tank first. And of course, saying, what does that have to do with what time it is? It has everything to do with what time it is. And unfortunately, I don't have a clock, so I can show you how this works. But basically, anything on the right side of the clock is going to be right tank. Anything on the left side of the clock, we're talking minute hand, by the way, is going to be on the left tank. So we're going to start on the right tank, or fullest is usually what it says. So coming down here, there's a bunch of little emergency switches. We have something for, of course, all these components. We're going to make sure our parking brake is set. We're going to make sure our landing gear handle is in the down position. That could be pretty embarrassing for us, so we want to keep that in mind. We're going to take our mixture and we're going to shove that that all the way in. We're going to make sure our propeller control is all the way forward as well. Although there's, as you can see, I'm having some fun here. We're going to take our cow flaps and we're going to push them all the way out. We're just going to give that a tug. And what that does for us is it opens these little flaps underneath right here, which is going to give us a little more air. If I close that off, of course, you can see they come slamming closed. Some people say it's a cold winter day, or should I leave them in what position? This isn't World War II, folks. We're not in that big of a rush. We shouldn't have to worry about that too much. So that's all set. We're ready to go as far as those particular components are. Like I said, there's no other real drama that comes to getting this thing started, thankfully. So priming this thing is a little old school. We have an auxiliary fuel pump here, and basically we're just going to run up the pressure, and then we're going to pop it back out. So we're going to go ahead and pop on our battery and alternator. One of the things we can't do in this one that we would do in the real world is we'd have to press and hold this button, and we'd have to fix with these add and subtract and center buttons in order to get this to the correct value for fuel. We don't have to do that today, so I'm not going to stress about that too much. So once that has all been set and everything's looking pretty good, avionics are going to be off. We're going to make sure our bacon light is on. Our bacon light is, where is the bacon light on this plane? Isn't that different? Isn't that different? I love stuff like that. So what we're going to do is I'm going to push the throttle all the way forward. We're just going to run up the boost pump, and that is our prime. Go ahead and crack that just a tiny bit there so you can see. I love how when you move the throttle, the button pushes in automatically because it locks. Why? That seems so dangerous. So we're going to go ahead and get this thing started. I'm going to look around now, just confirm that everybody's all good. Open up the little window. And we're just going to yell out, clear prop! It's pretty good. All right, let's do it. Now we're just going to catch it, and we're going to get about 1,000 revolutions per minute, comrade. And it's about 1,000 right there. And it looks pretty good to me. Delightful. So, of course, in the real world, this is when you'd be doing all your ATIS checks and stuff like that, and making sure everything's all ready to go and kind of those sort of pieces. For me, it's just a matter of getting things kind of configured for our flight here. And like I said, we're taking a very, very short flight today for the purposes of our little demonstration. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip on the avionics master power. Beep. I'm disappointed when they don't make certain sound effects. You know how I am. So we're going to let this thing get all booted up here. We're going to be flying, like I said, relatively short. We're going up to Hartford, Connecticut today, which is nice and easy for us. Of course, in the old days, we wouldn't turn on the alt mode of our altimeter, or our transponder, I should say, until we got to a better position. Of course, all we can do is we can use our good old-fashioned 11490 to get us there, but unfortunately, I have to wait for this darn thing to boot up before I can get to that point. So now that we've gotten power, we always want to double check for oil temperature. We always want to check to make sure our ammeter is actually working correctly. We're in the charge side. That's good. Oil pressure is, wow, knowing how cold it is outside today, that thing booted up fast. And oil temperature is already in the green. Oh my God. I can't tell you the amount of times in the real world where I've sat at the end of the runway in the run-up zone going, we can't leave yet. I don't have enough oil temperature. And, it's just kind of one of those sort of things that, people don't usually think about. So what I would like to do, though, is I'd like to get us up to Hartford. I'm going to pop that real quickly. I'm going to switch my CDI. We'll be old-fashioned here. We're a little too low to be able to pick this up. I had to guess, though, it's going to be something like that. That's going to be my guess. Cruise altitude today, I always like to set it before I get up there. Notice, by the way, it gives us whole thousands rather than half thousands here. One of the things that makes this kind of cool, or not cool, is if we pull this button here, this is where your vertical speed is going to actually be set here. But one of the things I can give you a hint with these older style autopilots is rather than having to go to war with trying to get all the knobs right and everything preset, just put your altitude in first and then kind of get yourself close and then snap over to the mode that you're actually going to need to do. So it's just kind of one of those things. Oh, I was so close, by the way. Nice, got it. Okay, so that's all set. The engines are warming up pretty quickly here. Cow flaps are in the right position. Everything's good. Starter, a yaw damper. We definitely need that, but we don't turn the yaw damper on until we get a little going here. This is looking pretty good on that side. That looks pretty good on that side. Standby, EGT is fine. Everything is actually pretty good. I don't know how the cylinder head temperature is already in the green here. I'm very, very thoroughly impressed by that. So we're pretty much ready to go. Now, of course, when I picked my little takeoff place over here at Republic, FRG, I designed it so I could just taxi about 10 feet to get going here. So when we're taxiing this one, very, very conventional, but you have to remember something. We have a weird tail here. So when it comes to aerodynamic effects of wind, it's going to make things a little more exciting for us than you're probably used to. Now you normally with regular planes, when I chomp on this thing, it gives us a little bit more capability here. So this aircraft, it wants to go. And depending on how heavy you are, we're definitely not anywhere near gross right now. It will want to basically take off on you before we've done anything with this airplane. But that's, again, part of the fun of why these airplanes are so incredibly awesome. So we're just going to give it just a little bit, and it's going to want to kind of run away on us. That is a very much a Bonanza. Even though you are a bigger, heavier plane than a lot of the planes you probably fly in the general aviation universe, this thing has places to be, and it will make every effort in its method to actually go ahead and achieve that. So we're going to get ourselves all lined up. Believe it or not, you are allowed to take off from the threshold. You're not allowed to take off from that thing, the little blast zone for jets. This is Republic, mostly private jets for New York City and stuff like that. So we're going to go and hit ourselves up at our little imaginary run-up zone here. I love the fact that like when they do these procedurally generated things, they just don't check stuff out every time. So of course we're supposed to be doing this into the wind. So I'm going to line ourselves up carefully, about the best I can here. That's what we're going to call it. And we're going to get to about 1,000 RPM here. Delightful. So run-up on this is completely conventional. There's a couple things that we would normally check that we're not going to check in the sim. One thing we'd be looking at, of course, is the autopilot. We basically run it through its test sequence. We can actually push that to get all the lights to come on here, and it usually beep, 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 until you push it again, it shuts itself off. We're not going to stress about that too much yet. The other thing we would do is make sure like the servos are actually moving and stuff like that. I love how there's a CWS button, but it doesn't work. Come on, my guys. Come on, give me CWS. It's actually surprisingly useful. It lets you steer the autopilot without the autopilot being on. It's pretty cool. All right, so for takeoff, we're going to go ahead and get everything kind of all set up. I'm going to flip on the, actually leave that off because we've got to do a run up first. We're going to get our landing lights on. Looks pretty good. We're going to rev this sucker up to about 1,800 RPM. We're going to exercise everything. You're going to notice the engine's a little not as responsive as some of its fellow engines. It takes a minute to kind of get caught up, especially in the real world. We don't see this here, but it, believe it or not, because of the way the oil is kind of gets more flexible with time, viscous, I should say. Let me be more specific. What it'll do, oh man, these magnetos are incredible. I was like, what, 75? But drop it to the other one. 75 looks pretty good to me. Exercise the prop. See, no airplane I think I've flown, with a couple warbird exceptions, have ever gotten this sequence correct where you pull the throttle back, or they pull the propeller control back and it runs away on you. You got to hear the whizz noise that it actually makes. It's quite satisfying. All right, I'm happy with that. Let's go sneak our way onto the runway here. Takeoff, of course, we have a couple different options as far as flaps goes. If we have a ton of room, which we do, we can do it without flaps. If we had to use flaps, we can use a notch of flaps here. And if I look down here, you can actually see that we have a 15-degree setting here that's considered approach flaps. So if I go pop that one click down, you're going to see it just cracks the flaps a little bit on me. It's nothing excessive. It's going to be just enough, basically, to help us off the ground. That being said, everybody who knows Bonanzas knows the fact that the flaps are very, very, very draggy. So you have to kind of be ready for that. So takeoff on this is pretty conventional. We're going to go ahead and engage our fuel pump here. We're also going to double check to make sure flaps are set, trim is set correctly. We're going to go ahead and flip on the fuel switch pump. Well, we don't want the engine cutting out on us for any sort of reason if the main engine fuel pump dies. And we're going to go ahead and be about as conventional as we can. So we're going to smoothly apply power. And again, remember, it's going to take a minute on this plane. This is not the same thing as a modern Bonanza. Looks good to me. I'm going to tap my head up so I can see. I don't know why developers feel the need. Look at how long the RPM takes to build up in this airplane. It's just a little different. Again, we could have done a short field, but we didn't really need a short field here. Notice the window auto closed. I appreciate that. 60 knots. We're just going to pull back, and this thing goes. Of course, we are single engine. Now we're going to leave the landing gear in the down position until we run out of runway. 80 knots is a good place to hold it. You're up. And we're just going to wait for the gear to come up. And it only takes a second. Like I said, these are very, very quick. Lights are out. Well, we are now got enough room underneath us. We're going to go ahead and pop up that notch of flaps. This plane would pitch up normally when the flaps come out. So I'm not worried about that too much. Gears in the neutral position. Flaps are set. We're just going to get a little bit of altitude. Remember my admonition that things always go bad when you change them. So we're just going to give it just a little bit more power. Notice the insane climb rate on this thing. We're holding 100 knots here. And this thing is doing almost 1,800 feet per minute, which is incredible. All right, speaking of 1,800 feet, that's about 800 feet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to gently start backing out the propeller pitch here. We're going to come down to 2,500 RPM, which is going to loosen it up just a little bit. And now we're going to go ahead and execute our turn towards our destination. Now that we are clear, now that our landing gear is set, now that everything is ready to go, we can come over here and activate the yaw damper. You really don't want that to be fighting against you during a takeoff or a landing. We can use the yaw damper down pretty low, but it's one of those things like when you flip the gear down, generally you pop the yaw damper off just for safety. You do not want to fight that thing. It's just kind of one of those things. So we're holding about 100 knots here. I'm taking a look at all my stuff. Everything's in the green. And this is such a pleasant aircraft to operate. Like you simply, it's so butter. Like I don't have to push the rudder very far to keep it coordinated. I'm still getting an incredible climb rate out of this thing. I'm already 2,000 feet above sea level, which is just incredible given the era. And like I was saying to folks earlier, is when it comes to Bonanzas, these things are absolutely excellent. So I'm just going to kind of level myself off kind of in this direction. We're going to be dealing with all the mixtures and all that other kind of stuff in a moment. But for now, I'm just going to kind of get myself heading up north towards Hartford again. We'll stick it over to VOR for now. So one of the things I had mentioned earlier is getting all your autopilot stuff. Basically, don't touch it until we get a little higher. So we're going to actually give ourselves a little more altitude here. I'm going to give myself 5,000 feet. I'm just going to go ahead and tap a couple of knots of trim. Now, on your joystick at home, if you have yourself a button that activates the autopilot servos, please get yourself one. I have one. It's actually right next to my finger, so I go click, and then my autopilot is on. That's as hard as that needs to be. So now that the autopilot is engaged, the only thing that's actually on right now is wing level and pitch. So the reason I love this is I can come over here and press heading hold mode, and what it will attempt to do is hold my heading for me. Now under Art, now if I press this arm button, notice in this, it immediately levels yourself off rather than continuing my climb up to my altitude. See how irritating that is? That's not how that works. That's not how that works. So what we have to do is we'd actually have to come in here, set this, and then engage vertical speed mode, set our vertical speed, and then it would start its actual climb upwards towards the specific altitude that we selected. Yeah, I feel you on that one. I feel you. That's pretty irritating. Again, we can now do this one. We're going to do 5,500. That's good. So now aircraft is climbing at 1,000. We're making our way up to 5,500. We're a little too far away from Hartford right now to pick up the VOR, which is kind of a shame. You can see we actually can calculate our radial here. It's 229. No, I won't do the entire flight. We'll use the magic of basically time travel here to get us a little bit closer. But at the very least, we can demonstrate kind of getting a little old-fashioned here. And I love this because I can just make a teeny tiny little adjustment, even though we're not actually flying this now. So the aircraft is going to continue climbing. And again, notice how this thing effortlessly climbs. And of course, now that we've got ourselves a little tiny bit of altitude, we can start thinking about our mixture control in this one. Now, the mixture control in this one is old school. I say old school. I don't mean it that in a bad way. I mean, it's a little old-fashioned. It requires a little bit more finesse than you're probably used to. Of course, the other thing we would do in the real world is we pull this out immediately. Fun fact for those of you who don't fly, you never need to pull this out that far. Usually it's about that. That's as much as it takes to absolutely melt your face, even if it's 0 degrees outside. Remember, these engines are 400 degrees. They're pretty warm. They're pretty warm. So we're going to continue our climb here, vertical speed mode. Like I said, unless you engage that, you have to engage it, then you have to arm it. The key thing here is you'll notice if I press altitude arm, it just levels us off. That's not how that works. That's not what it does. You can see how this makes me crazy, but it's okay. It's okay. It's okay. The other thing, of course, we can do here is we actually have a pitch reference modification. So if we wanted to, and again, if ARM is working correctly here, we can go ahead and just do that. So now watch what happens when I get up to 5,500 feet here. And again, that's not how that works, but that's okay. That's okay. And again, for me in the real world, as you saw earlier, where I just triggered on the autopilot and basically started kind of setting ourselves up, then I would reach over and hit ARM, and then when we level off, it would catch it automatically, so I wouldn't have to fits with it. You kind of see why that'd be kind of useful, sort of a thing like that. But again, we work with what we have kind of in these simulations. This is still a really, really nice job, and I think it is a solid experience. So you can see here that we have, I'll go ahead and crush 5,500 feet. Everything's ready. Altitude's at. Like I said, this little arm light should come on, but I'm not worried about it. It's no big deal. It works perfectly fine. We're at 55, let's go ahead and get ready for cruise. So now, just like on many of these old engines here, we can go ahead and fly it a couple different ways. Basically, anything in the green arc is considered acceptable. If we want to be nice and quiet, we can come down to 2,200 RPM and come down to 22 here. That's considered flying square. The key thing is just like those of you familiar with the Mooney, if you don't know what power to set it to, just add up to 50 for 75%, add up to 47 for 65, add up to 44 if you're looking for 55% power. Now, a lot of times, actually, we'll put that information here, but we don't have that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by reducing my power first, and we're going to go ahead and reduce our manifold pressure. We're going to come down to 22 inches here, which is going to reduce it. And of course, we're going to come over here, and we're going to drop it down to 23 inches. That's going to give us a pretty good combination of economy as well as noise. And again, we always want to be thinking about those two things. Now, one of the things we want to do now is we want to get ready to do the mixture business. The mixture in this one, of course, is relatively straightforward because we have one of these. And of course, the other thing we have is we have a tachometer. so it makes it very, very easy to identify what is doing what. Notice, by the way, how much fuel we've gone through already. Isn't that scary when you really, really come down to it? Yikes. So what we need to do now is we need to get this thing all kind of squared away as far as mixture goes. Now, one of the cool things is the book would tell you, of course, what GPH you need for certain power. I don't have the book in front of me today, so I can't look those numbers up. But for those of you who are inclined, Beechcraft Beechcraft F33 POH, and it'll be at the back of the book, and you can get the exact numbers you need for this. But for us, we're going to do the old-fashioned way, which is perfectly fine. So I'm going to go ahead and start backing up the mixture. We're going to see a lot of things happen. First of all, my gallons per minute, or gallons per hour, technically both, are going to start rising. This is correct. This is because we are now burning more fuel more evenly. So it's going to show an increase temporarily. The other thing you're going to observe is my exhaust gas temperature is going to start climbing upwards. That's just kind of the nature of the beast of these planes. So I'm going to go ahead and give this thing a few more tugs. I don't mind the plane, by the way. I put it on navigational hold mode. It's taking us up to Hartford. And it's being a little aggressive about it, not going to lie, but that's okay. So what we're doing is we're looking for when this peaks or when our RPM goes ring, basically. And now one of the fun things is you don't get to experience here. By the way, you want to shut this off before you do any of this. One of the fun things you don't get to experience is in the real plane it goes, and it's telling you basically that it's struggling to maintain it. Notice that our GPH suddenly started gliding downwards, and notice my RPM came up a little bit, tiny bit. So what we're going to do is we're going to keep backing up the mixture, and we're just going to keep an eye on the EGT here. And you're going to hit a sweet spot where the EGT is going to start taking off on you. And you can see we're down to about 13.8 here. Look how much fuel we're saving. And there's our sweet spot. So it was right about there, about 13 gallons per hour. How do I know that's the sweet spot? Because if I lean it a little more, do you see how it takes a dump? And now if I enrich it a little more, it'll actually go back the other way. So what we're doing is we're looking for peak, which is right about there. And then we're just going to enrich it just a tiny bit so that it takes this little kind of burp and just loses a little dot. So 13.6 gallons per hour is what it's going to work out to be today, which is actually not bad. That's good to decent. Remember, though, that our fuel economy, our fuel capacity on this, we've already burnt through 3 gallons, by the way, is not a lot. And that's kind of one of the natures of the beast of this particular tool. You can see, just to give you an idea, we have 11 gallons to get to our destination. GPH, we have about 3 hours of endurance, which is plenty. We can definitely get where we need to go in that amount of time. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and close up our cow flaps. We don't need these things dangling off the bottom of us while we're traveling at these altitudes. And then we'll see when we get a little closer to Hartford. All right, we're a little closer to Hartford. As a matter of fact, if I look out my window here, we can see it. The Connecticut River, by the way, is always a great landmark. And there's Hartford. There's our destination right there. Getting this thing back down is awesome. I love getting this thing back down to the ground. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and select an altitude. Traffic pattern altitude, by the way, is about 1,032 feet or something like that. We're going to go to vertical speed mode, and I'm going to go ahead and set this to negative 1,000. I notice there's this little arrow there to remind us we're going down. And I'm going to come up here and press Eng. Notice as soon as you do that, nothing happens. You have to reset it after it does it. So what I like to do rather than fighting the autopilot is I like to just disengage the autopilot, push the nose down a little bit, and we're just going to enjoy the ride down. Now, that's it. So now that I've got this thing going, I'm just going to re-engage the autopilot just like that. And we're pretty much all set there. And I can actually adjust the pitch reference right here if I need to, which makes it very, very simple for us. So this aircraft, we don't really make a lot of changes during descent. There's a couple of things we need to keep an eye out for. Every minute, we need to knock off an inch of manifold pressure. Otherwise, you'll find it up in the 28 range. That's not good for us. And the other thing, of course, we have to consider is our mixture. We need to make sure that is enriched. The other thing we want to do, too, is make sure our cow flaps are slammed closed here, because we definitely don't want those things basically letting out all our heat, so to speak, under descent here. So I'm going to go ahead and switch over to our heading hold mode here. I just need to come a little to the left because our runway is actually on our left a little bit. And we're basically going to race downwards. Some people get kind of nervous here. They're like, wow, you're going down really fast. Is that okay? Well, I'm in the green arc. That's fine. We can actually descend insanely up here, the 150, 160 range, if we're so inclined. Keep in mind, of course, when you do descents like that, you're going to be popping some ears. And you can see already I'm about 600 feet per minute downwards, which is pretty substantial. That's more than enough to basically make people uncomfortable. And again, it depends on what you're doing, where you're flying, who you're flying, what the conditions are, you're flying instruments, stuff like that. And you can see we are unbelievably close to Hartford at this point here. As a matter of fact, what we'd probably do is if we're using a 2-0 today, which is the other direction runway, we could probably do a left pattern. You can actually see the runway right there. So the book says we can go all the way up into this yellow line in descent. Notice I have not changed my engine power, but about a minute has passed. So what I'm going to do is back that out an inch. And all we're doing here is trying to keep the engine as warm as possible during our descent. One thing I will do, though, of course, is I'll switch to my other fuel tank. Whenever you switch to the fuel tank, run the fuel pump for a little bit in case you have anything just kind of like stuck on the line somewhere. That'll kind of encourage its mobility, if you want to kind of think of it sort of another way. So that's going, that's looking pretty good, I'll go ahead and shut that sucker off. I'm not going to worry about it too much here. And you can watch our little destination, Rensselaer. They had a TFR the other day that stopped me from flying. A little annoyed about that, but unfortunately we didn't win the game. So let's get ourselves a little bit closer to the runway. All right, we're in a left traffic pattern. Everything's looking pretty good. So one of the things, like I was saying all along here, is the concept of keeping that engine warm. And one of the things we have here is we're popping into our left traffic is we're going to use about 15 inches, which is like kind of like the absolute minimum. And the nice thing about it is 15 inches is almost exactly 100 knots, which is a great speed for us. It's going to keep us from getting too crazy as we go ripping down this pattern here. Now, the approach on this aircraft is relatively straightforward. You're looking between about 80 knots is kind of the sweet spot, depending sort of what you're going for here. But the big thing here is, remember, we have landing gear, and we have to make sure we get those out as kind of a thing. Generally, I like to do both at the same time once we're a beam. So beam, we're going to drop the landing gear, and we're going to pop in our first click of flaps, and we're just going to slowly start slowing ourselves down. Now, when you do this, because of the way the camera does this thing, and I hate that. People, don't do that. It's wrong. Is we're going to have to let our nose kind of come down, and we get about 90 knots here, and that's pretty good. This aircraft gets very sinky, and you'll know exactly what I mean. So we're going to go ahead and swing left. I'm not going to put my next click of flaps in. And this is an important concept with this plane. A lot of people get in really bad accidents with this plane during this turn because of how quickly it slows down. Very high drag. I'm actually having to bring power in here to kind of keep things up. We're already kind of low. And just to give you an idea of what that looks like, I'll just pop out the window real fast here. So we're going to come down, and we're looking for an approach speed of about 80. You can probably go as low as 70, but that's getting a little slow. But like I said, over the fence on this thing, 80 is pretty good. So I'm going to go ahead and pull us onto final here. You can see we're just a little bit high, but that's okay. Go ahead and drop in that last notch of flaps. We're just going to check to make sure everything looks good, which it does. And we're just a touch high, but that's perfectly fine for this plane. Now be careful with this turn. Do not join the fork-tail Dr. Killer Club. That's not a good thing. And basically what we're going to do is we have a little bit of crosswind. We always do. And we're just going to kind of enjoy the ride down. You'll find this aircraft to be very stable. Last thing I like to do, of course, is I like to shut off the yaw damper. Probably should turn on landing lights too. That would be very respectful. And we're just drifting off course here. Nothing new. And getting a little slow, but again, we can just give it a quick tap of power. And depending on how heavy you are, like for us, we're very light right now. So it's going to be a bit of a project. Over the fence, and we're just going to start backing that throttle out. Make sure everything's all set with that. And that looks pretty good here. And we're just going to do pretty conventional. So when we do this one, it's just, remember, you're a little high up. We're just going to hold that nose up. And there we go, nice and down. I'm going to go ahead and give us a little bit of a crosswind correction as we settle down. And that is glorious. Look at that. I'm barely even tapping the brakes there. And again, awesome plane. Very easy to fly plane. Once we're on the ground, the last bit of a cleanup that we need to be thinking about, of course, is we need to get those cowl flaps opened. Some people will fly with approach with the cowl flaps deployed. The reason we would do that, of course, is it's going to make it a little bit less likely to overheat during the summer because of kind of high power, low settings. But again, it depends on what you have. So as you can see, this is an absolutely wonderful airplane. And it's such a treat to fly something like this. So I think it's pretty cool. And for $10, I think it's worth it. Enjoy.